Mexicans love Dragon Ball Z, and Latin America does too. So I'd figure the best way to mourn the death of Akira, the sensei, is by making a presentation on why Mexicans in Latin America love Dragon Balls so much. So in case anybody stops you in an alley or the cartel stops you in an alley, ask them what would Goku do and tell them why Dragon Ball Z is meaningful to all of us. So the main factors are four, and it's like economic factors, accessibility to anime, accessibility in general in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. There's a cultural resonance where Latin Americans just relate more to the themes of anime and Dragon Ball in particular. American cartoons are awesome, and being an immigrant that, lived some of my early childhood here in the United States, like I loved some American cartoons, but they were pretty unrelatable for me as a kid in the hood. And if American cartoons were that unrelatable to me living here, then they were definitely unrelatable to, people in Latin America and Mexico. Older animes like Dragon Ball have the power of nostalgia, and they benefit from nostalgia, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So for the economic factors, it's pretty simple. In the 80s and 90s, it was just cheaper to get anime licensing over to Latin America. Obviously, the United States had cartoons and had a bunch of shows, and since it's too expensive to develop animation, well, Latin America had to kind of resort to licensing. So they would buy this licensing. The dub was actually pretty high quality, so they were able to get the dub in Spanish right away in most cases. So it was cheaper to do so in Latin America. And at the time, Japan was trading mostly technology and automobile technology with the United States anyway. So that was kind of the relationship here. So if you look at it, really the advantages of adopting anime in the early 80s and 90s is just early adoption helped a lot, the overall accessibility of anime. And then we'll talk a little bit about the next point, which is the cultural resonance and the themes of anime. So in Dragon Ball and anime, the themes of family, perseverance, and honor are explored. And, martial arts and overcoming adversity, all of those things with the character development, they kind of portray a different relationship with death. And in Latin America and in minority communities in the United States, we all have a different relationship with death. It's just more likely that we're more likely to know someone that has passed away or someone that has been locked up, or we all have a family member or a friend that has had someone get shot, etc. So in anime, unlike American cartoons, in anime people die all the time, and there's a lot of tragedy, and there's character development based on tragedy. So because the relationship with death and the way that death is portrayed and displayed in anime more, it instantly makes it more relatable to us. Especially in the 80s and 90s, Latin America was going through a ton of turmoil and a lot of uncertainty with a lot of dictatorships and regime changes and just, overall chaos. And yeah, also Mexico in general culturally has a very different relationship than death than the United States, where our native folk like the Aztecs or like the Mayans, we had just a totally different relationship with death. And we also adopted some things from the Spanish, like, like the Day of the Dead and whatnot. So overall, because there is death and tragedy in anime, it's instantly a little bit more relatable to us than American cartoons. I'm going to take you through a couple of examples so that it can further illustrate the big contrast between American cartoons and anime, so you can take a look at why we Latin Americans relate to anime more from our lens. So we're going to talk a little bit about these three. I think that these are pretty good examples. So Fairly Odd Parents, to me, and this is just my humble opinion, is a show that revolves around a child with magical fairy godparents who grant wishes. And this show explores individualism, also individual desires, and the exploration of the consequences of getting everything that you want without effort, right? So the theme of the show is be careful what you wish for. Challenging authority, the authority figures is like the babysitter. The authority figures in the show are like the parents, the teachers, and challenging those authority figures in the way that Timmy does are kind of unrelatable to a Latin American kid. The theme is a little bit less relatable because in Latin America, kids tend to have a closer relationship with their parents. They're not necessarily watched by a babysitter. They're more watched by a relative, and they have to respect their teachers. In fact, in some Latin American countries, some teachers still discipline kids physically. So also parents may take their kids to work with them at an early age, whether it's working in the business or even helping them at work. They watch them at work and they have them sit down and do their homework there. They have them walk to school and then from school to their place of work, and they literally watch them right there. So the concept of absent parents, which is Timmy's struggle, that's the struggle for Timmy in Fairly Odd Parents. The concept of absent parents is not necessarily there because even if a kid in Latin America doesn't have a father or doesn't have a mother, because it's more of communal living, there's basically someone always there to watch your kids. And so in Fairly Odd Parents, what the fairies come and do is they come and fill that hole, right? And so in America, in a similar way, absent and neglectful parents may feel like they're solving the relationship or the void of the relationship with their kid by just throwing money at them, right? And that's essentially the meaning of Fairly Odd Parents to me. And watching that as a Mexican kid growing up in the hood in the United States, it was cool, but completely unrelatable. So another show that's a pretty good example of like the first world problem concept and unrelatable stuff is Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. In general, there is less developed foster programs in Latin America. There are orphanages, but there's just, not, but foster homes are not as common. And so the concept of foster homes for imaginary friends to me, from a Latin American perspective, is, it's a home of imaginary friends that go to live there after their kid outgrows them, right? So this show to me is a commentary on the loneliness problem in the Western world, right? So if kids have imaginary friends, it may be a natural thing in the United States, but it's definitely not as common in Mexico, and it's probably not as common in Latin America. And this is just me speaking anecdotally, because like there's a ton of siblings that are running around. There's a lot of friends that are running around, and it's a lot less likely that your kid grows up alone in Latin America. So you don't really have a need for an imaginary friend. And so cool concept, but it would be really hard to grasp in Latin America. Another one that's interesting to compare to me is ScoobyDoo. To be fair, there is a little bit of fandom in Mexico with ScoobyDoo because it is older. So now over time, it uses the power of nostalgia, which I'm going to get to soon. But some of the commentary that Latin America has on ScoobyDoo in general is that, a group of meddling kids, and they just have all the time in the world to go be Karens, basically, right? So in Latin America, we just tend to mind our business. Also, the fact that these kids are just like roaming around with a van, and it doesn't look like they work, and they don't really do anything for money, and they're like not really kids, they're actually like they look a little older. It's just really unrelatable. And I know it sounds hilarious, and if you're American, you're just like, bro, it's a fucking cartoon. And I get it, I understand. I'm just saying that, yeah, there is a little bit of fandom, but the reason why it's still unrelatable and people meme about it in Latin America, it is basically just a group of people that are unemployed that walk around Earth not minding their business and getting into other people's business and then just investigating, right? So like the meme of like the white person that says, let's go check it out in like the Scary Movie. Like Mexicans and minorities ain't doing that, bro. So, and I'll tell you the truth, not every single American cartoon is completely unrelatable. One of the reasons that SpongeBob is loved in Latin America, this is just my anecdotal take on it, is bro actually has a job. Like bro goes to work and he works really hard. He's really prideful about his job. He's also getting taken advantage of by his boss. And those are really common themes for immigrants in Latin America. There are some American cartoons that are relatable, but even SpongeBob is nowhere near as relatable to something that explores the concept of death, like Dragon Ball Z, like the Knights of the Zodiac, like all kinds of animes that came out from the 80s and 90s, and of course, Naruto, like being like super popular in Latin America as well, right? To talk about the story of Dragon Ball Z and Goku in anime a little bit more, family dynamics is something that's very relatable. Like I said before, people will take their kids to work, they work with their parents, and also a personal take for me, when I was a kid, some of my earliest memories of my dad is going to go see him at his dojo where he would teach karate, and then I knew that he worked in the military somehow. So to me, my earliest memories of my dad is me thinking that my dad is Goku, because I would see him only at night, and so he would work all day and come home at night, and at night I would see him with his gi, and then he would take me to his classes at night where he would teach. So for me, it was me going to go see my dad at work, and then I get to see this show where like, oh, that's probably what my dad does. Like, that's probably just what he does. So little personal story there, but in reality, working in collaboration with your kids is something that's basically portrayed, in Dragon Ball Z a lot, and that's really relatable to Latin America. Mentorship and growth, the way that Piccolo raises Gohan and basically steps it up. It's like it's the concept of the of village and community living, right? So again, in Latin America, the concept of apprenticeship is still very prevalent. there's apprenticeships here in the US too. Like obviously you can go get an apprenticeship to be a tattoo artist, etc. But in Latin America, where in some cases some people can't afford education or can't even get education, being a student and having not like a master, but basically having somebody that is not your father that you trust with your life, and they become your second father because they're teaching you how to make that bread. So anime portrays that with the concept of a sensei, and also obviously I just illustrated the relationship between Piccolo and Gohan. The power of nostalgia is insane, right? So with early adoption in the early 80s and 90s, we're basically looking at over 30, 40 years. No, even more, right? Wait. So the oh wait, yeah, the 80s are 40 years away. But yeah, man, like, the early adoption helps with that because the power of nostalgia gets really charged every 5 to 10 years. So, every generation that you could pass things down to, it's insane. Like the power of nostalgia for Dragon Ball Z, like businesses in Mexico use Goku and the Super Saiyans, in their in like their business advertisement. I know you guys have probably heard that funny story of the Mexican government playing Dragon Ball Z episodes and fights in like local government like town halls. And downtowns, and it got so crazy that even the Japanese government had to send like a cease and desist letter to a lot of towns and cities in Mexico because they were just like going about streaming all this stuff in a pirated way for the locals. But like, bro, like they treated this shit like a fight. And I know, and I'll put here, this is a flyer of like, this is how some people were advertising some fights in Dragon Ball, like as if it was a boxing match. So like, I also saw some memes and stories and tweets about like the Dominican Republic, how there's a local government in the Dominican Republic that tried to change the time that Dragon Ball was airing to try and change it to 9 p.m. because it would air at 4 p.m. in the middle of like the workday, and it would literally stop production. so that's insane, man. Like we just really love this shit, right? In conclusion, man, the popularity of Dragon Ball and anime among minorities in the United States can be attributed to cultural resonance, the relatable theme of struggle and personal growth, economic accessibility, and the appeal to diverse storytelling and animation. The integral transmission of fandom combined with the power of nostalgia contributes to the enduring popularity of Dragon Ball and anime in minority communities. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that detailed presentation to show you how much Mexicans in Latin America really love Dragon Ball and anime in general. For me, this show means a ton because, like I said earlier, my dad, I thought he was Goku, and I thought that that's what he did for a living for the early stage of my life. And the ripple effect that this show had in my life is insane. If my dad would have never got into Dragon Ball and passed the love of anime to me, then I would have never gotten to Naruto, and Naruto was basically my religion throughout high school, and it helped me respect my mentors, and I'm here because of my mentors. So it was an insane ride, and I really thank this guy, right? So we're all grieving right now. Jesus, a bunch of Mexicans are grieving right now. Latin America's grieving for you. And so thank you so much, Sensei Akira Teriyama, for your service to humankind. And this was my way of grieving and doing something, even if nobody sees it, for you as a thank you for everything that you've done for us. So yeah, I like doing this stuff. I think this is a faster way for me to put out videos. So if you enjoyed this, make sure to join the community. And I'm going to keep doing these probably every other week, hopefully, because I've never made a YouTube video faster than this. And I realized that I should just make presentations, since what I do for a living is basically just make a ton of presentations. So I'm going to be exploring themes that are in my mind so that my current clients and future clients and future business partners can get to know me a little bit better. And so hopefully we can, and also so we can hopefully help people along the way. So, yep. Thank you. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.